Hello. Welcome to Welcome to the Gamemaster's Welcome to the Gamemaster's Grimoire, Episode 2.
It is talk on the Gamemaster's Grimoire on how to run the true RPG.
Welcome to Episode 2 of the Gamemaster's Grimoire. This episode we're going to be talking about willpower. This is definitely the most complicated and possibly an original idea. There are some variations of it, like Dungeons & Dragons has inspiration, but that's not directly the same idea. So, let's get right into it. Now the first question we can ask is, what's the purpose of willpower? Why do we have it in a true RPG? Quite simply, it can add to the drama. The true RPG is all about dramatic situations, all about characters' motivations and role-playing, and willpower is a way that you can almost embellish upon that and really help the players move forward. Imagine in Dungeons & Dragons, we'll use that as an example, not necessarily saying that the true RPG is better, this is just an idea, and this is why I made the true RPG, mostly inspired by Dungeons & Dragons, that being my main RPG that I've played. But nonetheless, imagine a situation in Dungeons & Dragons where you're DMing and one of your player characters have died and it has thrown the balance of the fight way off. But one of the characters is like, no, I have to get revenge now, I have to do this, this is my quest, I have to destroy this monster, or something along those lines where they have a sudden drive because their friend has died. And so they push forward and they keep going, but then they die, and it was a little bit anticlimactic, and then you have a full party kill. That's not very good as a game master. That's not very good in terms of the story, in terms of all your plans that you've been wanting to push forward, in terms of even drama. Sometimes that can be really bad. And usually the desired outcome is for either the desired outcome is for them to fight till the very end and like actually do tons of damage and have like a really cool strategy at the very end, but then they lose so that it actually matters, or they fight and they have that surge where they try as hard as they can and then they actually succeed very slimly, but they only succeed because of their willpower, because of that drive that they have, because of that motivation. And that's what should matter. It's very much like an anime in many ways, and that could be the structure for most fights, not all fights. But the willpower system allows for those fights to occur in that way so that you can boost that character's ability to do what they want to do. And also in those situations, in those dire situations when they're running on adrenaline or running on pure willpower, in those situations, their passion should have some sort of mechanical implication. It should move forward what they can do so that they can actually do it. And if their character has a thing, has some special power that's really overpowered, you can tell them they can do it if their will is there, if their passion is in it, right? If their heart is in it. And so willpower is the way that you can do that because it can give big bonuses. But on the other end, willpower can work for depression. It can work for when they lose or when something happens to them and it just throws them into a terrible mental state where they just can't do anything. Or where they are just moping, pretty much, and all that they do is affected by that. It could be that you could go either way, based on what the character is, based on how they roleplay it, based on what their cool invested stat is, which would be roleplayed anyways. So there's that. There's also some other ways to work in willpower. So you could have willpower be an exhaustion kind of thing, and there are recent exertion and exhaustion rules built into the true RPG, but it could be they're fighting and they keep fighting, or they're running, or they be running. But yeah, they could be like running or fighting or doing some sort of physically taxing pursuit. And in doing so, they weaken themselves and make it so that they can do less things because what they're doing is taking up energy and they're just throwing away all their energy in one thing. And so that makes them have to think and, in a way, video game it more in the way that they have to think about their energy and think about how much they can do so they're not just continuing to attack, but they're trying to be creative, move around things, maybe use diplomacy, maybe do other things because they might be exhausted. And also this has to do with more of a reality because I want to make the true RPG. Over time, I've been slowly adding things to make the true RPG more realistic or more representative of reality. And so in that way, exhaustion can really do that, and willpower is directly tied to exhaustion in the way that your willpower decreases the more you get exhausted. So there is that to keep in mind. Now, the willpower rules are very complicated. For one, you use a d4. You use a d4 instead of a d10. Secondly, willpower can increase to 6. There are technically 7 notches because you can have 0 willpower, but mathematically it can go 0 to 6. And when your willpower goes up, you can do more. When it goes down, you can do less, or you're less good at what you're trying to do. There are a few ways you can do it as the Game Master. One thing, you could make it so they don't even roll. You just say your willpower goes up by 1, or your willpower goes down by 1. If you say it goes down by 1, the players might be a little pissed. They may be like, oh, but then again, sometimes it would just make sense. And I've had my players ask me once, could my willpower go down? Because that actually makes more sense in this situation. So if you have good players, yeah, that'll really be good, and there will be a good dynamic there. But in trying to dole out different willpowers, you have to do it fairly based on the situation, based on how they've been role-playing, based on what has happened, and their characters and all that sort of thing. You have to account for all those factors, and just try to be fair with that. But there is actually a mechanical basis for it if you wish. For example, if they get hurt, if they get attacked, they'll have to roll cool for willpower, which is pretty much with willpower rules, with the d4, you roll either cool or invested, so both of the attitude stats, and cool keeps you from falling in your willpower. Cool keeps it so that your willpower doesn't go down, and invested makes it so your willpower goes up. So if you have cool, you'll be way more stable. If the higher your cool is, the more stable you'll be in terms of willpower, but your willpower won't go up. It'll just kind of stay around the base. When you are very invested, your willpower will go up a lot and down a lot. It's very unstable. You're almost bipolar. And the more that happens, it pretty much just means the more you'll be affected by your situation, the more your situation will emotionally affect your character and make it so that either they get really depressed, and then maybe they'll rise up and get really driven and motivated to move towards their goals. In all, you roll the d4 when your willpower is going to be decreased, and you add your cool. And there's a certain number set by the Game Master, so set by you. And the number is usually good to have as 4, but sometimes maybe 6 because it's a very difficult thing to be unaffected by, or sometimes you could even make it just 2. But do keep in mind that some people, if they have +2 or +3 invested, that means they could roll a -2 on this, right? And the highest they could roll if they have +3 invested, which means they'd have to have expertise, but whatever. If they have +3 invested, the highest they can roll on this is a 1. So keep that in mind. Sometimes you could have a 0 if it's... But yeah, no, a lot of the time, yeah, don't do that. Also, on this, this is mostly up to the opinion of the DM and the situation, mostly your judgment. But on this dice, if you roll 2 below the number that you need, for example, if you set the number to be 4 and they roll a 1, that's 2 whole numbers below, you could decrease their willpower by another 1, kind of thing. So instead of it just being, you could have different tiers, I guess, of willpower, and so for every 2 below, then you decrease it by that. That way there's a little more versatility, so that it's not just increased by 1 or decreased by 1, because that can take away drama a little bit if it's such a gradual thing. But sometimes being a gradual thing can really help the story. And sometimes, if there is a case where it would make sense, just say your willpower goes to 6. Use that sparingly, though. Wouldn't want to step on this guy. These dice are vicious. But yes, as I was saying, with willpower, sometimes you can roll this little dice for invested instead and raise your willpower. So that can increase it from maybe your base at 3 or 4 to 5, 6. And in doing so, you're more driven. Your character has a sort of adrenaline rush and they can push forward. But also in doing so, they might be more risky. They might be more willing to throw themselves or throw their life away. In many ways, high invested is linked to high reckless stat, which is an interesting idea. Maybe keep that in mind. But yes, when you have high willpower, like a willpower of 5 or 6, your bonuses to all rolls, all d10 rolls are increased. I cannot hold on to a dice. As I was saying, all of your D10 rolls have a bonus when your willpower is higher. So just to review, willpower is decreasing, something is happening that could make you depressed, roll cool with the D4. When you're doing something that is like, oh, I'm going to be driven by this, I'm going to push forward, well then much in the same way, you would roll the D4 and add invested. And based on that, certain thresholds, your willpower will also go up. And there are certain powers that can increase your rolls for willpower in general. Now, onto harm. Harm is an interesting idea. In most RPGs, there's like a health or hit point system. With harm, it's a little different. It's a little more rigid in the way that your willpower can be directly affected by harm. So when you get hurt, when you get stabbed or punched or anything like that, you will sometimes have to roll willpower, and if you'll have to roll cool for the most part to keep it so that your willpower doesn't fall. But sometimes in that situation, if it would make sense as the DM, you can have them roll invested and make it so that, for example, if they're punched in the side of the face, then they get suddenly angry, and then their willpower actually goes up maybe by 1 or 2. So in doing so, you can kind of use willpower to move the tide of the situation in whatever way would be the most dramatic. But yes, pretty much when it comes to harm, when they take damage, they have to roll their willpower against the damage taken. And if they go below, that's like pretty much the number that they have to hit or get higher than in order to have their willpower change in a way that they'd want, I guess. Now, like I spoke about earlier, Exhaustion and Exertion are 2 rules that are very new to the system and kind of bring in a new idea to combat, where you have to balance your stamina a little more. This will take a little bit of explaining. Thank you. So you can see all of the exertion and exhaustion rules on the site, which will be linked in the description. But pretty much, there are certain tiers of exhaustion, and whenever you do certain actions like attacking with a heavy weapon or doing anything that takes lots of energy, like big jumps, things that have risk mostly, or also spellcasting. Spellcasting almost always, unless you have an incantation or skill in certain spells, it almost always uses exertion because it's like some sort of mental willpower energy. It's like a very abstract thing, but it uses your energy when you cast spells. So either when it comes to physical prowess or weird, you will have to have certain exertion. And other things like parrying, whenever you parry, unless you get a certain power, it uses 1 exertion. If you prepare your parry before, it doesn't use that exertion. That kind of thing. There are a lot of rules based around that, and as the Game Master, I would just read all the sections. In the site, I would just search the word exertion, and then go through all the pages that have that. I think parrying, heavy weapon attacks, and difficult things, those all require exertion. So when your exertion gets to certain tiers, then it deals with exhaustion. So exhaustion is when it hits a certain tier. Tier 1 is 5 plus the character's central physical prowess, so if they have +2 in tough, then that would be just 5. In that case, once they reach 5 exertion, then that's kind of like almost a threshold. They can't go back from there until they rest. So once they hit that point, there are certain effects that can affect willpower a little bit, but each tier affects willpower in a more drastic way, such as Tier 2 is 10 plus CPP, which is Central Physical Prowess. Tier 3 is 15 plus CPP, and then Tier 4 is 25 plus CPP. And the higher you go, the more risky it is with your ability to do anything, and once you get to Tier 4, any action makes it so that you have to roll invested of 15 or else you will fall to 0 willpower. So it's very difficult. You have to really manage your energy. And the idea behind that is when you get to 0 willpower, you can't do anything. You are stuck not being able to do any actions. And it could be either from depression or just you collapse. You can't have any energy. And that's much more of a realistic hit point system in a way, because the longer you fight, the more you do, the more damage you take, all that kind of thing really affects how your character can act. That's how it should be, not necessarily just some weird hit point or health system where you can fight just as well as you can at 1 health than you can at full health, right? No, it affects it in very definite ways. Also, when you're bleeding out, that can really affect things with exertion, and thusly through that with willpower. So you really have to deal with harm, exertion, and willpower. They're like very interlinked, and mostly what you want to keep up is willpower. That's the main thing. But no matter what character build your characters have, if they're cool, their willpower won't drop as much. If they're invested, their willpower go down a lot, but then maybe up a lot. Who knows? It's very balanced no matter what you do. Now, on the character sheet, you can actually see that I changed the character sheet a little bit and added exertion and exhaustion tiers to it. Now with these, it goes up from 0, just like how harm goes up from 0, and pretty much you just keep track of exertion the whole time, and it doesn't go down to 0 when you get to a new tier of exhaustion. It just keeps going up, and those tiers pretty much just keep increasing by that. And once you get to those tiers, you can't erase that. You can't really change that. So the only way to decrease your exertion is by taking a turn to do nothing, but when you do that, your exertion kind of stays at those tiers. It can only decrease to those tier numbers. Like, for example, we'll go back to the tough +2 example. His first tier was 5. If he gets to 7, he can sure take 2 turns to decrease that to 5. But then taking turns won't do anything after that point. He is exhausted. That will be his exhaustion, right? His exhaustion makes it so that he can't go down in exertion past that point. So in that, it can be really key to keep those certain exertion levels not raising past those exhaustion tiers. There is one way to reset that, and that is when you rest, when you sleep, or when you have what would be classified as a long rest in D&D, then you're able to pretty much reset and go back. So there's a little bit of math here to remember. It's very simple. It's just what tier you were at. So if you're at tier 3 when you fell asleep, then it's that tier minus 1 will be your exertion when you wake up the next day. So in that case, if you fell asleep at tier 3, you'd wake up with 2 exertion. Not 2 tiers of exhaustion, just 2 exertion. So it's kind of almost like you're a little bit tired from the last day. But nonetheless, your exhaustion does go away when you sleep. Also, when you have downtime, when you take like time to just do random stuff that doesn't really take exertion at all, you're technically doing nothing for some of that time. And so if you have a lot of downtime, then your exertion just goes down to the closest tier or to the lowest tier that you're at of exhaustion. That's kind of an obvious thing, but just keep that in mind. Now, there are some ways as a game master you should try to control the player's willpowers a little bit, just to make it so that it actually is used in dramatic situations, because it can really easily get out of hand if you do something like you have an NPC make fun of one of the characters, and then suddenly they get to 6 willpower every time. That just takes away the impact of when they get to 6 willpower. So maybe in your mind, keep a threshold like they can only go up to +4 willpower, and maybe down to -2 willpower, or down to 2 willpower. -2, oh shoot. No. They can only get down, like, keep that range so that it's 1 around the base in normal times, and then when they're in battle or when some big dramatic story beat happens, then you can use willpower as a tool to drive things forward and make it so that the players are really engaged. But if you use it too much, then that can just take away from the importance of it, and so that can just kind of... And the problems in that are self-explanatory. Now, another idea is willpower doesn't have to have an end at 6. If you're doing some sort of anime campaign, I've done those in the past, they're really fun, or if you're doing some other kind of campaign that's really willpower based, if they get to 6 willpower for one fight, but another fight that they're doing in the future has way more drive to it, you don't have to keep 6 as the max willpower. Right now, 6 willpower has +5 as a bonus. You can go up to 7 willpower. That can blow the minds of the players because they've set up this expectation that 6 is the max. But if you as a game master just surpass that and say, yeah, +7 willpower, +7 is your bonus, they will be like, amazing. And then they can do stuff and they'll have that drive. It'll be more dramatic. It's great. Don't do that much. Actually, I would say don't do that. But if the situation comes, don't be kept back by the rules. That's one thing I really didn't want to do in the True RPG, is have the rules be in any way hindering what you, the Game Master, wants. Well, that's all for the Game Master's Grimoire. Thank you for watching, and we'll be back next week, perhaps with a video concerning the true RPG, or perhaps with videos concerning different builds you can have in the true RPG, or perhaps, if you want it, do you want a video based on how to make an RPG or different ideas in homebrewing? Well, we will, there's a poll we'll put right here or something like that, and feel free to suggest what you want. And also comment below any questions you have about willpower, harm, or exertion, exhaustion, that sort of thing. I hope it makes more sense now than it did when just reading through the site. And what I said earlier, go back through the site, read, I think it's just all one page, exertion, exhaustion, harm, and willpower. Just read through that section. It's not that long, and hopefully you can understand with my explanation now. Thank you for watching. The Zealots of Birbio say farewell.
You heard this talk on the Gamemaster's Grimoire on how to run the true RPG.